Every few weeks, you'll see a new game trend on Roblox, indirectly started by developers that achieved rapid success with a specific type of game. This is because, in an effort to replicate said success, other developers create different iterations of that same game concept with a few minor differences. Some recent examples of games that started new trends include Steal a Brainrot and Grow a Garden, both games that became instantly successful and, thus, resulted in hundreds of clones being made. Among these recent examples though, there is one that's caused a lot of controversy and debate. Shooter vs. Hider, formerly known as Shooter Active by the group Shooter Active. As both the title and thumbnail allude to, the game essentially places you in the perspective of either a mass shooter or a victim of a mass shooting within a realistic looking map. The concept itself is similar to prevalent murder and killer games on Roblox, but what differentiates it from the rest, in my opinion, is the game's presentation and its features. The game's original title, Shooter Active, is a play on the words active shooter used to characterize the perpetrator of an ongoing mass shooting. The game's multiple thumbnails show an NPC hiding from a shooter under desks, tables, and chairs, and the game includes multiple features such as blood splatter, screaming sound effects, visual and auditory bullet whizzing, and maps mimicking real-life locations in order to add a sense of realism. Due to all these things, the game gained somewhat of a mixed reception, with some saying how it's just another killer game, while others perceiving it as a glorified mass shooting game that promotes that kind of stuff. Critics, defenders, and the developers themselves took to Twitter to voice their concerns and provide their perspective, which resulted in just a massive shitshow. After all the outcry, Roblox, surprisingly, took relatively quick action and deleted both the game and the group hosting it. However, the game left a lasting impact since, due to its rapid success, other developers saw it as an opportunity for profit and made their own iterations of this same concept. Essentially, all of them, in my opinion, being mass shooting simulators with a few minor changes. This whole situation has two differing perspectives, either that these games have a right to exist, or that they don't. What's my take? Well, it's complicated. Before explaining my thoughts on the situation, we have to understand the full context of the games themselves, how they were made, and the rebuttals offered by the developers. Starting off with the game responsible for starting these mass shooting games in the first place, Shooter Active, or Shooter vs. Hider. Shooter Active is responsible for popularizing this new mass shooting game trend, as it was the very first game to utilize the concept and, with the help of its controversy, gain a massive player base. The game itself has a bit of an odd history. It was initially developed by a user named Pemble08 under the name Shooter Active, which he published on May 8, 2025, under the group going by the same name. The game would gradually gain success through its shocking concept and honestly being just pretty well designed and engaging. Sometime in late June, Pemble would be approached by Inter Studios, which is run by a user named Remaining Scripts and a few others, to buy the game off him. They reached an agreement, and the game would be sold for around 11,000 to 12,000 USD. Ownership of both the game and the group was then transferred to Inter Studios. After the game's transfer, it became even more popular, which, in turn, also increased its notoriety. Several people advocated for the game being banned, as even though it wasn't based on any actual real-life mass shootings, it still heavily referenced them and was seen as disrespectful for those actually involved in similar real-life incidents. On the other hand, there were others who saw the game as being completely harmless and the complaints being brought up against it having no merit. Now, before getting into the events that led to the game's eventual takedown and the shit show that took place after its deletion, I want to showcase the contents of it so you can get a better understanding of things. The version of the game I'll be showcasing is a re-upload published by Inter Studios under an entirely different group. This version barely has any changes, so it's practically identical to the original. When you join the game, you spawn in a small cubicle lobby with random textures on the wall, textured spheres, a sign telling you to like the game, a shop, an emote shop, and other random things. There's two leaderboards, Killer wins and Survivor wins. killer wins representing how many wins you've gotten as a shooter, and survivor wins being the wins you've gotten as a survivor. You can use said wins in both the normal shop to buy different items and the emote shop to buy, well, emotes. Before a new round begins, a map is selected, all of which mimicking real-life locations and having a realistic style. The maps include a beach, an office, an airplane, a dance club, and a town. When the map is chosen and the round begins, you're assigned either the role of a shooter or a survivor. As a survivor, you have 30 seconds to prepare for the shooter's arrival. After the 30 seconds are up, the shooter arrives, and you have to avoid them for 3 minutes. If you survive the 3 minutes, you're then equipped with a gun intended to kill the shooter. You have exactly 1 minute to find and take down the shooter. If the shooter is killed, survivors win, but if time is up or the shooter kills everyone, the shooter wins. As the shooter, the objective is pretty simple. Shoot the survivors in the allotted time frame. You're given a realistic looking gun to carry out the attack. And that's basically the core gameplay loop, either being the shooter who has to kill all the remaining survivors, or a survivor who has to avoid and then take down the shooter. As you can see, the game follows the traditional killer game system seen in many popular games like Murder Mystery 2, Hide or Die, and more, where there's killers who have to hunt down innocents. These games are also specifically mentioned in the game's description, saying how they were an inspiration, and as you'll soon see, the developers of this game also used them as a defense for their game's existence. I'll be addressing these defensive tactics in more depth later on, but for now, I just want to say that, in my opinion, presentation is what differentiates Shooter Active from all these other killer games. The core gameplay loop is evidently pretty similar, but it's the game's context and the features that cause debate and controversy. The game includes several different features to add a sense of realism. These include visual and auditory bullet whizzing, your screen turning red when you're shot at, blood splatter from damage, screams and splatter noises when shot, maps mimicking real-world locations such as an office, and ragdolling when killed. Again, the game's core gameplay loop is practically identical to all the other aforementioned games, but its execution, in my opinion, is what differentiates it from the rest, and is the main reason that people have an issue with the game, said issues being conveyed through Twitter. As stated before, Pemble sold Shooter Active to Inter Studios sometime in mid-June. After transferring ownership, the game became even more successful than before, with it, at one point, having over 4,000 players and also being shown in Roblox's up-and-coming section. With this growth though, also came massive backlash. One of the first accounts to shed light on the game was Row Catchers, an account known for calling out disturbing things on Roblox. On June 25th, 2025, they attached an image of the game and asked for people's opinions on it. One of the responses to this tweet came from Scripts, or Remaining Scripts, one of the people running Inter Studios who now had ownership of the game. In his tweet, he states, "Hypocritical. Play the game before you comment. We do not condone shootings in public places. Is Rivals technically a mass shooting game? The free-for-all game mode includes shooting other people. Hide or die? Move on." He also says how they were speaking with Roblox's developer relations about the game, but as you'll soon see, this might not be true. These rebuttals didn't offer much to change the game's declining image as seen by many of the replies. According to some of them, the game originally had the narrative where the shooter was a disgruntled worker and kills everyone in an office, but I wasn't able to find any evidence for this, so take it with some skepticism. After this point, the game would receive a lot of negative attention, and in an effort to save its declining reputation, the developers entirely rebranded, changing the game's name to Shooter vs. Hider, changing the thumbnails, and removing some of its graphic features. However, these changes weren't enough to sway public perception, as things only got worse. At this point, public perception of the game was somewhat still mixed. However, this mixed perception would primarily become negative when it was revealed that within one of the maps, there was a direct reference to an infamous mass shooter. Among the people advocating for the game's termination was Roblox YouTuber Schlepp. Schlepp made several tweets voicing his concerns about the game, and one of them, which was made on July 1st, 2025, revealed that hidden within one of the maps was an NPC wearing tactical equipment, military pants, a chud face, and a natural selection t-shirt. For the few unaware, this NPC is meant to represent one of the two mass shooters responsible for the Columbine massacre, which took place on April 20th, 1999, Eric Harris. This discovery would do irreparable damage to the game's image, as it hinted at the possibility that the developers seemingly glorified mass shooters and that the game took influence from their actions. There were still some people defending the game, saying how Schlepp hates fun, how it isn't that deep, how it's based, how it's a nothing burger, and how it's peak. Just take a look at some of the accounts of these defenders, and you can see what type of people the game caters to. Overall though, this was perceived negatively and caused even more hate for the game to circulate. Now, I get that this could have been some edgy joke or something, but still, it's not exactly a great look when you're trying to defend your mass shooting simulator Roblox game, and obviously, this did not help the game's already declining reputation. Now the main question was, who was the one to put this in the game? The original owner, Pemble08, the current owners, Inter Studios, or someone else entirely? Well, Pemble himself clarified things. On July 1st, 2025, Pemble would respond to this tweet from Schlepp, stating, "I take full responsibility for this. I was the original dev, and one of my other devs added this without my knowledge. When I made the game, mass shootings were not my intention to replicate. This was not Inter Studios. Hey bruh, it wasn't them. This was all my fault. I shouldn't have left that in there when I sold the game." This claim is consistent with Pemble's other tweets, and when I met him in one of his games, he also said the same thing, so I assume he is telling the truth here. He also, supposedly, cut ties with the person who put this in the game, and provided a statement from him where he said, "When I made that character, I wasn't trying to glorify them or anything. I just thought it would be funny to portray him as a chud, you know, make fun of him." When questioned by another user when this unknown person was kicked out, Pemble replied, "I mean, basically right after I found out. I just said, I know it wasn't his intention, but regardless, I can't work with someone with that kind of edgy views, even if it's a joke." I find it pretty ironic how someone who led the development of a Roblox mass shooting simulator can't be friends with someone who has edgy views, even as a joke, but okay, I guess. You can see why that's ironic, right? Schlepp would respond to Pemble's tweet, where he addressed the Eric Harris NPC, stating, "The original creators of Roblox's active shooter respond. He claims the current owners have nothing to do with it. Either way, if the current owners have no involvement, this was in the game, and it shows what the goal of this game is." Pemble, in response, states, "I am saying fully on the record, I did not intend to make any sort of shooter simulation. Once again, a dev added this a long time ago, without my knowledge. If I would have known, I would have deleted this, and not continued to let that dev work. I should have checked. It's my fault. I just wanted to make a version of Blood Depth with mobile controls that was less violent, and less of a weird community. Didn't intend for it to blow up, sold it to pay for my college. I don't glorify or support or fantasize about mass shootings, and never have." The following replies are in relation to Schlepp's initial tweet, where he revealed that an Eric Harris NPC was hidden in the game. For some reason, Pemble thought it was a good idea to reply to practically everyone who was criticizing him. Dokin is cool states, "Worst part is, the person who made the game put in the bio that it has nothing and wasn't intended for it to be based on mass shootings. This just makes what they said even more disingenuous, even though it already was." Pemble responds, stating, "I didn't even know this model was in the game. I don't know why you are lying. I, of course, take responsibility as it was my team, but I coded and made the concept for the game, and I do not support or glorify any of that." Breeze states, "What's next? Are we gonna see BMWs and Doom Vision next? The ability to write manifestos?" Pemble replies, "Ridiculous to say this. My dev put this in as a sick joke, and I didn't even know about it. Why are we acting like I am some alt-right insane person?" Jack Rees states, "The game was originally shooter active shooter backwards. The game has a hidden model outside the map referencing a real-life shooter from Columbine." Pemble responds, blatant engagement bait. No real life shooting do the survivors literally have guns, among other teams, to fight back. The model was put in as a sick joke, and the team member who did that was instantly let go. Blood Depth replicated an office shooting way more violently. GusBug0 says, why does the game have the shirt the mass shooter at Columbine used when he did the shooting? And why the would they have a mode that's basically you hide in schools until the police arrive and kill the shooter, just like IRL? Pemble replies, keep saying there is a school map and stuff, and you can catch a cease and desist from my lawyer. School maps and any mention of Columbine have never been referenced in the game. The model was a bad joke making fun of Eric Harris, and was removed immediately, and the dev was let go. People like you who are genuinely lying about what I put in the game, and twisting a stupid situation which was resolved and the person faced punishment is quite literally slander. You could ruin my life spreading shit like this. Pemble would make various more tweets regarding the Eric Harris shirt incident, but ultimately, on July 3rd, 2025, Shooter vs. Hider would be put under review due to all this controversy. This didn't stop the arguments on Twitter though. As conveyed through his tweets, Pemble's main goals for replying to practically everyone was to defend himself against the notion that the game was conceptualized as a mass shooting simulator, explain that both him and Interstudios had no involvement for the Eric Harris model, and to ensure that he doesn't suffer any real-life repercussions because of his game. To an extent, I understand his reasoning, but I think his best course of action was just to clear his name with 1 or 2 tweets, then stop responding. The approach he took of replying to almost everyone just made things more complicated, in my opinion. Schlepp would make another tweet on July 3rd, 2025, where he includes a Discord image of Pemble saying how Schlepp's tweets, be they positive or negative, are still giving him more publicity and impressions. As a response to this, Pemble states, actually, this comment was in reference to the slander on my name that you have been openly supporting and allowing in your comments, such as suggesting I made the game to simulate my dark fantasies, which just isn't true, allowing your audience to find and harass me as well. Schlepp responds, I've been allowing slander of you in my comments? Buddy, I can't control comments. People read what you said and formed opinions on it, but saying no such publicity is bad publicity when we're all calling this game out for having assets of school shooters is not a good look. Acting as if I didn't platform your statement so more people could read it. Literally added it right underneath the main tweet. Sorry everyone on Twitter isn't kissing your ass. What an actual joke. Pemble replies, that was one part of my 5-part message. Lamau, cherry-picking not showing the full story. Meanwhile, you fanbase goes for the throat of a 20-year-old college student. Lamau, you make no attempt to reach out or calm any of these things. Schlepp states, your statements directly contradict each other. You want your side of the story to be showcased, but you are also going at me for putting out your side of the story because not everybody buys it. Then you play a victim card. Okay, bro. Pemble replies, show me the contradiction in full context. The only reason I said engagement bait and thanks for the new players is because you ignore the fact that I literally said sorry and the game was being redone. This is a classic dickhead with a big platform weaponizing it for a narrative. It's like, of course, you are entitled to your own opinion, and I understand all your points, and they aren't bad points, which is why I feel bad, and I never intended it to be this way. I just don't want my life ruined over someone else's doing, and a game I don't even own anymore. Shakespeare's relative then writes an entire essay about how both Schlepp and Pemble should chill out, and that the game has a right to exist. Both of them reply to this tweet, with Schlepp stating, bro just called me a dickhead in the reply above this, and now we gotta be chill and have a respectful conversation. Lol, no thanks. I owe him nothing, and I put out his side of the story. I personally don't believe it, and other people can take his comments at whatever value they want. Pemble's response states, literally exactly my thoughts, like, I really am deeply sorry for anyone that I offended, wasn't my intention. Schlepp chooses to ignore that, and his fans are actively attacking and lying about me, which could have serious repercussions on my real life. Pemble would continue to reply to various other tweets, basically reiterating these same things in an effort to defend himself. Now, this is a bit of an odd situation, and is honestly just a giant mess. On the one hand, I do feel sympathetic towards Pemble, while, on the other hand, I feel him to be somewhat disingenuous. Starting off with my sympathetic views because, as you guys know, I'm a truly sympathetic guy. If he's truthful in saying that he was being doxxed and harassed due to the tweets against his game and for the game itself, I of course do feel bad for him. No matter how you feel about the game, I don't think doxing anyone involved or harassing them is appropriate at all. Like Pemble himself said, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and you can be vocal about it, but that obviously doesn't give you the right to go after the person being criticized. There were also some people pushing the false narrative that the game included a school map, which meant that it was a school shooter game. This is entirely false, and I'm not really sure how this rumor even started. I guess people just associated the game having mass shooting elements to it being a school shooting game, but yeah, that's not the case at all. The game has no school map whatsoever. The last thing I feel sympathetic towards Pemble for is the rumor that he made the game to fulfill his internal destructive desires. I don't think Pemble has some psychotic tendencies or wants to be a mass shooter or anything like that. I think his main goal was to make something knowingly controversial in order to get some profit. He did not intend for people to be influenced by the game and actually commit a mass shooting, nor did he want to make a game based on his internal desires. He just wanted cash. This is where my sympathy for him ends, as some of his tweets, in my perspective, are pretty disingenuous. In one of his first tweets, Pemble says how his intention for the game was never to replicate mass shootings, which I don't believe at all. In my opinion, the game, from the beginning, was conceptualized as a mass shooting simulator, and this is evident in how it's presented and the mechanics it houses. The original name of the game was Shooter Active, which is a play on the words active shooter. The thumbnails showcased players hiding underneath objects with the shooter in the background. The game has realistic looking maps. The shooter uses a realistic looking weapon. Blood splatter is present when a player is shot. Players scream when they're killed. Players ragdoll when they die. And there's visual and auditory bullet whizzing. Yes, I understand, the game doesn't specifically reference a past real-life mass shooting, but what it does do, with the help of all these factors, is indirectly reference them. I think Pemble intended to do this from the very beginning. Again, not to promote mass shootings or create a game based on his sadistic desires or anything like that, but just for profit, since he knew the controversy would propel the game's popularity. This is my perspective, but I think what happened was that Pemble always planned on including realistic features and presenting the game in a certain way so that it gained controversy, and then he would use said controversy as a marketing tactic. However, when he sold the game, it reached a level of popularity he never expected, which, in turn, also increased its notoriety. When people started calling out the game for all these flaws, he backtracked and started offering all these different excuses in order to present the game as just a fun little experience. This could or could not have happened, but in my opinion, I think it's highly likely. Like I said, I don't think Pemble has some destructive views of being a shooter himself or anything like that, nor do I think his main goal for this game was to promote mass shootings. However, I find it hard to believe that he did not consider the game as a mass shooting simulator from the beginning. This of course doesn't mean that Pemble should be harassed, doxxed, or attacked for this game or his statements. He most likely just wanted to make a controversial game and wanted to make some quick cash, but due to the size it got, the game received massive backlash, which he thinks will affect his personal life, which I'm sure won't really happen. It's just some people on Twitter. I don't think it's a big deal. Now, as stated, Shooter vs. Hider would be taken down by Roblox on July 3rd, 2025, but would be republished by Interstudios under the group SVH on July 16th, 2025 with minimal changes. As of this video, the game has over 500 active players and over 130,000 visits. If you recall, Scripts, or Remaining Scripts, one of the people behind Interstudios, who now owns Shooter vs. Hider, said how his team was in talks with Roblox's developer relations on the game existing. When I initially mentioned this tweet, I said I was skeptical, and the reason for this is because instead of the original game and group being put back up, they just republished the game under an entirely different group. If they actually did speak to developer relations, they would have received a definitive answer on if the game could be allowed or not, and if it were allowed, it would be put back up, which it did not. It's possible that they were told that the game could not exist, and they just brought it back up anyways, but who knows. We'll see if this game continues to remain up, but what's more concerning, in my opinion, is the multiple clone games that have surfaced due to the game's success and popularity. As explained before, Shooter vs. Hider, or Shooter Active, used its controversy and negative reputation for profit and players. No matter how you perceive the game or its reputation, the game was objectively successful. This rapid success has indirectly fostered a trend where other developers, in an attempt to replicate the game's success, developed their own iterations of the same exact concept, housing identical features and minor adjustments that barely differentiate them from one another. As stated in the beginning of this video, every few weeks you'll see a new game trend on Roblox where other developers see a massively successful game and hope to replicate its success by developing their own versions of the same exact concept. With Shooter vs. Hider gaining rapid popularity through its controversy and shock value, it indirectly sparked the creation of multiple mass shooting simulators on Roblox. There's numerous Shooter vs. Hider clones that are just as controversial and house the same graphic features for the sake of realism. They do have a few minor differences that differentiate them from one another, but in the end, they all do the same thing: provide mass shooting simulators that indirectly reference real-life tragedies. Fight the Shooter, published by Game Group 191234 on May 7th, 2025, is one of these mass shooting games attempting to capitalize on the trend. Although being published in May, the oldest comments in the group date back to early July, which was when Shooter vs. Hider was taken down. Due to this, I think it's safe to assume that this game was released after the deletion of Shooter vs. Hider. Within the game's description, there's a disclaimer that states, "This game is not meant to depict any real events and is not based on any real events at all, so it should not be taken seriously." You'll see these types of disclaimers in the descriptions of these games, or within the games themselves, as they're put in there in an attempt to portray the game as nothing more than a fun little experience. You'll also notice that a lot of them reference other games they're supposedly inspired by. This is done to indirectly say that if those games can stay up on the platform, so can theirs. Now, when you join the game itself, you spawn in a small lobby area with leaderboards, an armory, crates, tables and chairs, textured spheres, and more. Before a round begins, a game mode and map are selected. The maps in this game include a city, a nightclub, an office, and more. Similar to Shooter vs. Hider, the maps all mimic real-life locations, but are made even more realistic than that game. The game also includes several different game modes instead of only one. These include Normal, where there's only one shooter, Duo, where there's two shooters, and Trio, where there's three shooters. After the map and game mode is selected, you're teleported to the map and assigned one of two roles, a shooter or a survivor. As a survivor, you're given 40 seconds to find a hiding place, after which the shooters are then spawned in. You have to avoid getting killed for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and if you do, you're given your own weapon to kill the shooters. You can also kill other players if you choose to do so. You have a minute to hunt down the shooters. If the shooters are killed, survivors win. If shooters kill everyone, the shooters win. If time is up, both shooters and survivors win. As a shooter, you spawn in the map with a realistic looking gun after the 40-second hiding time. Your main goal is to shoot down all the hiding survivors within the allotted time. If you're placed in a duo or a trio round, you can also kill the other shooters, and your health is also split between the different shooters. So if you're in a duo round, you and the other shooter will both have half the health of a singular shooter. Using the coins you get from playing, you can buy different crates, which unlock different emotes you can play using this menu. That's basically how the core gameplay loop works, and as you can see, it has a lot of parallels to Shooter vs. Hider. These parallels are further evident when you account for the game's different features. The game has visual and auditory bullet whizzing, blood splatter, red screen borders when being shot, limping and ragdolling, screams and death sounds, and more. All these things contribute to the game being presented as a realistic experience, which further adds to its controversial and unsettling nature. Off Limits, published by ASND.rocks on June 27th, 2025, with the description, "No references to in-real-life activities in real life. sole purpose was to make a fun, exciting game like Murder Mystery 2, and we do not condone the negative part of the player base, is yet another mass shooting simulator. Once again, the description tries to disconnect itself from being a mass shooting simulator and the destructive players it caters to by portraying the game as just a fun experience and saying how it's inspired by other killer-themed games. When you initially join the game, you're greeted by another disclaimer message similar to the one seen in the description. It states, "This game is not based on any real events. All maps are purely fictional, and the same goes for designs. We do not condone mass shootings." Once you accept this, you load into a small grassy lobby with a fountain in the center, scattered trees, textured spheres, and meme images. There's 3 different leaderboards: shooter wins, survivor wins, and total wins, each being pretty self-explanatory. On the left of your screen are 3 different buttons. The first is a shop, where you can use your wins to buy different items. The second is the settings page, and the third is your backpack to equip the items you bought. Before a round begins, a game mode and map is chosen. Similar to the previous game, this game has a few different game modes, including Normal Mode, where there's 1 shooter and 3 responders, Juggernaut Mode, where there's only 1 shooter, Officer Edition, where there's 1 shooter and 4 officers, and Trader Mode, where there's 1 shooter and 1 trader. The maps in this game are similar to the 2 aforementioned games, where they all mimic real-life locations and are made to be realistic. There's a house, a hospital, a skyscraper office, a bunker, a city, and another sorta office-type area. Once both the game mode and map are selected, you're then placed in one of the many teams. As a survivor, or as this game calls it, a bystander, you're given 30 seconds to hide from the shooter. After the 30 seconds are up, the shooter spawns in. Depending on which game mode is selected, you have to survive for either 3 or 2 minutes, and after the time is up, you can be given a gun. You have exactly 1 minute to take down the shooter. You can also kill other survivors if you want to. If the shooter is taken down, survivors win. If the shooter takes down everyone, the shooter wins. And if time runs out, the survivors win. As the shooter, you have to wait until the 30-second hide time is over in order to spawn in the map. You're given a realistic looking gun, and simply have to kill everyone in your way in order to win. As a responder, you have to wait 1 minute before spawning on the map, after which you have to take down the shooter. As an officer, you have to wait 1 minute and 30 seconds before spawning in the map. You then have exactly 1 minute to take down the shooter. The last thing of note is that no matter what team you're on, you can harm others by pressing the T key, which makes your player punch. As you can see, the core gameplay loop resembles the previous games mentioned, and just like those games, this one inhabits numerous features for the sake of realism. These include blood splatter, a red screen border when you're shot at, visual and auditory bullet whizzing, and more. The thing that makes this game even more disturbing than the rest is that there's officers and responders that are present in certain game modes, which heavily mimic an actual real-life shooting. The last game inspired by Shooter vs. Hider we'll be taking a look at is Rampage. Published by Impractical Games on June 24th, 2025, the game, unsurprisingly, emulates mass shootings. When you join, you spawn in a small city lobby area with buildings and tunnels on each side. On the left of your screen are 4 buttons: Emotes, where you can play your acquired emotes; Inventory, where you can cycle through your purchased skins and abilities; Shop, where you can buy different emotes, skins, abilities, and game passes; and Settings, where you can toggle a few different things. Similar to Shooter vs. Hider, the game only has 1 game mode, where 1 player is selected to be the shooter, while the rest are survivors. Before a round begins, a map is chosen. The maps in this game, once again, mimic real-life locations such as an office, a metro station, a town, and a skyscraper, but credit to the game, it also includes cartoonish environments such as the classic Crossroads and Haunted Mansion. Once both the shooter and map are selected, survivors are then teleported to the map. As a survivor, you have 30 seconds to hide until the shooter shows up. Once the shooter arrives, you have to survive for 3 minutes. Once the 3 minutes are up, you're given a gun to kill the shooter. You can also kill your other teammates if wanted. If the shooter is killed, survivors win. If the shooter kills everyone, the shooter wins. If the timer reaches 0, survivors win. As a shooter, you're given a realistic looking gun and simply have to kill everyone in the allotted time to win. Similar to the other games, this game also contains various features to make things more realistic. These include visual and auditory bullet whizzing, red screen borders when you're shot, blood splatter, and death sound effects. As you can see, all these games are just different iterations of the same concept. They have a few different features that differentiate them from one another, but in the end, they're all doing the same things, providing a mass shooter simulator, indirectly referencing real-life tragedies, and indirectly promoting these types of things. The games I've discussed aren't even the only ones, as there's many more trying to profit from this new trend that just haven't picked up yet. The developers try to justify and defend their creation by saying how they don't endorse mass shootings, how games like Murder Mystery are able to exist on the platform, how they don't support the psychopaths among their audience, and how they're just trying to make a fun game. I'll be explaining my position on these games in more depth later on, but all I want to say for now is that even if these games were made with pure intentions, I still don't think it compensates for the fact that they're indirectly referencing and promoting mass shootings. You can put all these warnings, make all these comparisons to similar games, and try to argue that the intentions behind the game are pure, but in the end, the games glorify, promote, and reference mass shootings, and cater to a specific demographic of people who find these things disturbingly interesting. Not to mention, these games expose the concept of mass shootings to thousands of players, which, of course, includes children. Now, Shooter vs. Hider was the game I blamed for starting this trend of mass shooting simulator games. However, this isn't really true. Yes, Shooter vs. Hider popularized these types of games and massively contributed to starting the trend, but there's actually another game I intentionally left out that is the true culprit behind the creation of all these games: Blood Debt. Within many of the tweets and game descriptions I showed off, you might have noticed that a game named Blood Debt would often be mentioned. It's present in these tweets from Pemble, it's present in these tweets from others, it's present in the description of Fight the Shooter, and it's present in the description of Off Limits. The context for why this game is being mentioned is to either justify the existence of these mass shooting Roblox games and to say that this game was an inspiration to them. Based on this, you'd assume that Blood Debt is also a mass shooting simulator, or at least has some heavy correlation to those types of games. This presents the question of what exactly is Blood Debt? Blood Debt is a game published by I Tried At Least on April 4th, 2025. The description provides a narrative of when the game takes place, stating, "Summer of 1999, life in the Nubic Union has been unforgiving. Desperation drives people to take loans from the shadows, where the cost isn't just money, it's obedience. Some become enforcers, unluckier ones become targets. A killer with a debt that can only be paid in blood. 3 sheriff guns, 5 killer guns." Based on this alone, the game doesn't really seem to have any elements of a mass shooting game, and seems to be doing its own thing, but maybe the gameplay will clear things up. When you initially join, you're confronted by a disclaimer message stating, "Hey, this game has depictions of crime, fantasy violence, and things that might appear as disturbing or cruel to players." When you accept this, you're hit with another disclaimer stating, "Content warning, this game doesn't take inspiration from real places or people. If there are any similarities, it is a coincidence. This is fiction, and these depictions have no relation to any real places, people, or events." On the bottom, it also says, "We're serious. If you're not happy or feeling good, hop off and play later." That's 2 back-to-back disclaimer messages, which isn't really a great sign. After accepting these series of disclaimers, you spawn in a grassy lobby with a few random things placed around. These include a table, car, character art, fan art, and some other random things. When a new round begins, a map and game mode are selected. The maps range from things like a city, house, office, factory, and more. The game modes include stuff like depth mode and team war mode. When both the map and mode are chosen, you're assigned a specific role depending on the game mode. These include a bystander, a gang member, or a killer. The game has pre-baked character roles as well, so instead of playing as your own Robloxian, you take on the role of a made-up character. Depending on what role you're assigned and what game mode is selected, you're instructed to do specific things to win. For example, if depth mode is selected and you're the killer, you have to complete different tasks to find the specific player you have to kill within the allotted time, while as a bystander in depth mode, you have to complete tasks so the timer goes down and you have to avoid the killer. Based on all this, the game seems pretty normal and distinct from the mass shooting games that reference it, the only similarities being the realistic maps mimicking real locations, and the game following a basic round game system. However, this game does something different from the rest, which basically hides its mass shooting content from uninformed players. The game actually has another game mode I purposefully left out that's titled Juggernaut, and this is the content being referenced by both developers and defenders of the aforementioned mass shooting games. Within the Juggernaut game mode, one player is selected as the shooter and has to kill everyone in order to win, while the survivors have to avoid said shooter. As a survivor, you have to avoid the shooter for 1 minute and 15 seconds, after which you're given your own gun to kill the shooter, and the police arrive. You can also harm other survivors with the gun provided. If you are killed by the shooter within the 1 minute and 15 seconds, you respawn as an officer and have to take down the shooter. The game also includes numerous graphic features that are somehow even more disturbing than the other games we took a look at. The usual things are present like blood splatter, death sounds, and more, but there's also heartbeat noises when the shooter is close, character spazzing when a lot of health is lost, and the ability to surrender as the shooter. Like I said before, the game has pre-baked characters you take the role of, and the characters you take a role of as the shooter are made to look tormented, depressed, and psychotic, housing faces that show them crying, smirking, or drooling. Even more disturbing is that after the end of the Juggernaut round, you're given a small excerpt explaining info about the shooter. One, for example, states, "He never talked about anything but guns. He would explain how easy it would be to do something big, like he was discussing the weather. No one took him seriously until they did." As you can see, this game mode is where the game's mass shooting content lies, and because you have to wait for this specific round to be selected, it's essentially hidden until you actually spend time playing the game. Out of all of the games covered, this is probably the most graphic and realistic. The mass shooters themselves are depicted as sad and unhinged through their facial expressions. Characters spaz out and are seen holding their wounds when they lose a lot of health. Blood splatter is present. The game has realistic maps mimicking real locations, and police show up to take down the shooter in the end. All these things emulating real-life mass shooting situations. Blood Depth is responsible for this new mass shooting game trend on Roblox, while Shooter vs. Hider, or Shooter Active, is responsible for popularizing it. Both of them contributed to the trend as a whole, and because of them, there are now numerous mass shooting simulators on Roblox that put you in the perspective of the individual responsible of a shooting or the victim of a shooting. Now, the existence of these mass shooting games is honestly a very opinionated topic, and as I've hinted at throughout this video, I don't exactly think these games should exist, at least in their current iteration. Let me explain. To start off, I want to begin by addressing the defensive tactics used by the developers behind these mass shooting games to dissolve themselves from any blame and to portray their intentions as pure. Many of the tweets I showed off and many of the games themselves have these disclaimers where they say that they don't condone mass shootings, don't intend to promote them, and how the games only serve as a fun experience. For example, Blood Depth has two separate disclaimers saying how the game may seem disturbing to some, and how it doesn't aim to depict any real-life situations. Fight the Shooter has a disclaimer saying how the game doesn't aim to depict any real events, nor is it based on any real events. Off Limits says how the game doesn't include any references to real-life situations, and how they only wanted to make a fun, exciting game. Remaining Scripts, or Scripts, one of the people behind Inter Studios, who now owns Shooter vs. Hider, says how he doesn't condone shootings in public places, and Pemble, the previous owner of Shooter vs. Hider, says how he did not intend to replicate mass shootings within his game. All these claims are used to defend the existence of these games and to waive any responsibility off the developers. The intent of these games might not have been to promote mass shootings nor condone them, but intent doesn't really matter in this specific case. All these games glorify, reference, and promote mass shootings through both their execution and strive for realism. People who play these games don't care about the developer's intent. They're gonna play these games and interpret them however they want. There's no doubt in my mind that these games will make some unhinged psycho view mass shootings as something cool or thrilling, and possibly make them commit one in real life. Obviously, I don't hope for this, and the probability might be low, but it still is a possibility. Along with this, these games allow already twisted people that fantasize about these things to live them out virtually, which could ultimately push them to do these things in real life. I'm not even giving just a hypothetical here, because I've actually faced this firsthand. When doing research for my TCC video, I stumbled across a game simply named Pool. Uploaded on February 17th, 2025 by Face Natter, the game was essentially a school shooting simulator where you took on the role of a school shooter executing his attack on a high school. The game had identical features to all the mass shooting games I showcased, besides taking place in a school, having survivors be NPCs, and not having a round system. Blood splatter, screams, and other things were present. While recording footage of the game, someone joined it and shared his intent to commit a mass shooting in his school. This is how our conversation went. "I'm getting ready to do this to my school. Dude, no way. Not joking. Are you kidding? No. Which grade are you in? 10th. Dude, are you kidding? Or for real? I am for real. What's your plan? Police first. My bullies. My goal is everyone. Where are you gonna get the weapons? I have them. From? I will not say. You bought them or they're your parents. This will be on February 26th, tomorrow, 7:55 a.m. What influenced you to do it? Cannot say. Any real-world events? I am a psychopath. Do not investigate me. I'm not investigating. Or you will be in my book. I'm just trying to see if you're for real or not. Okay, that proves you're kidding. Lol. Want to bet? I can do a lot of things. Such as, be careful, watch what you do, and say. He would then leave the game and say this in his bio. March 20th at 7:55, no one is safe. Goal, everyone. After this, I reported this guy, confused on whether he was kidding or not. Of course, this could have just been an edgy kid trying to be funny, but you can't really tell online. My point in bringing this up is to say that games like these give twisted people an outlet to virtually carry out their attack, live their sick fantasies online, and possibly push them to do these things in real life. Moreover, they also expose thousands to the idea in a glorified manner. Again, the developers behind these games can say that this isn't their intention or that they don't promote these things, and they're probably telling the truth, but none of that matters. You're still giving players access to a mass shooting simulator and instilling the concept to thousands of kids' minds. Literally all these games contain maps emulating real-life locations like offices, towns, and beaches where real mass shootings have actually taken place, and they also contain graphic features giving the games a sense of realism. There's no fantasy elements or heavy distinction made between real or fiction. When you strive for realism in a game about a mass shooting, it's gonna be attributed to real events, even if that wasn't the original intention. The second defense tactic used to defend these mass shooting games is false equivalence. Within many of the tweets and games, you'll notice that the developers reference games that they perceive as being similar to theirs as a way to justify the existence of their mass shooting simulators. Let's take a look at some of these games and see why exactly they're able to stay up without any controversy. Scripts, or Remaining Scripts, in his tweet mentions two games in a defense for his game Shooter vs. Hider, or Shooter Active, Rivals and Hide or Die. He specifically mentions Rivals free-for-all mode, where players are put against one another and have to rack up the most kills. This is probably one of the dumbest comparisons because this mode gives everyone a low-poly weapon to fight one another in a cartoony environment. There's not one shooter while the rest have to run, nor are there any realistic features. There's no realistic blood splatter, there's no death noises, there's no realistic looking environments, there's no realistic looking weapons, and overall, the game has a cartoony vibe. The only thing this game has in common with Shooter vs. Hider is that when you're damaged, your screen turns red. That's literally it. The other game mentioned, Hide or Die, is literally a prop hunt game with a cartoonish atmosphere and environments. Similar to Shooter vs. Hider, there's two teams, Seekers and Hiders. As a hider, you can morph into any object and have to blend into the environment until time runs out. If you're caught by a seeker, you're then also turned into a seeker. As a seeker, you're given a low poly gun and have to shoot players hidden as props. The core gameplay loop is similar to shooter versus hider, but it's the way the concept is presented that makes things okay. The maps aren't made to look realistic and house colorful and cartoony assets. The guns you use are low poly, UI elements are colorful, and the sound effects are also cartoony. There's no blood splatter, there's no bullet whizzing, and there's no death sounds. The only feature similar to the mass shooting games is that when you're a prop and near a seeker, your screen has black borders around it and a heartbeat sound plays. That's literally it. Another game you'll frequently see being mentioned in the descriptions of these mass shooting simulators is Murder Mystery 2. Once again, a similar gameplay loop where there's one killer who has to eliminate the rest, except in this game there's also a sheriff. That's where the similarities end though, as there's no realistic blood splatter, no death noises, no bullet whizzing, and the maps, even though being somewhat realistic, have a cartoony atmosphere. The weapons within the game are also not realistic and are simply modeled and textured. As you can see, all these games being brought out in an attempt to defend these mass shooting simulators have some similarities and do somewhat use the same gameplay loop, but what differentiates them is that they're not striving for realism and they do not cross the line. The reason games like Shooter vs. Hider gained such a negative reputation, and in my opinion, shouldn't be on the platform, is not because of the concept itself, but the execution of the concept. The features within the game and the presentation contribute to the game indirectly referencing and promoting real-life mass shootings. The realistic looking maps mimicking real-life locations, the realistic blood splatter, the death noises, the character ragdolling when health is lost, the realistic looking guns, all add to the game being too realistic and crossing the line for what's appropriate and what's not. If these games were to change a few things, such as having low poly maps, or a colorful UI, or no blood splatter, or the shooter being some sort of monster, or even just low poly guns, they would generally be accepted a lot more. But because these games attempt to encapsulate a sense of realism, they basically become mass shooting simulators, even if that wasn't their intention. A game that I think properly portrays what I'm trying to say here is Survive the Killer by Slice Entertainment. The game has a lot of parallels to the mass shooter games we took a look at, such as having realistic maps mimicking real locations, red borders on your screen when the killer is close, screams when a player is hurt, a heartbeat noise, and a red border on your screen when you're hurt, your player limping when hurt, and there only being one killer while the rest being survivors. The game also includes a school map, which is not seen in any of the previous mass shooting games. So then, what differentiates this game and allows it to exist without any backlash? Well, the difference between all those games and Survive the Killer lies in tone, visual design, and execution. Survive the Killer leans into a horror aesthetic, as if you're playing an interactive horror movie, and all the features I mentioned are presented in an exaggerated way. For example, the sound that plays when the killer sees you, and the music that plays when they're chasing you, is a classic horror movie trope, and is exaggerated. Along with this, the weapons used by the killer are cartoony and not realistic at all. They're stuff like bats or knives that are simply textured and modeled. The UI is also pretty simplistic and isn't trying to be edgy or realistic. It's just basic black and white colors which, once again, reference horror movies. The differences between all the shooting games I mentioned and this game might be minimal, and the same concept and gameplay loop are at play, but it does more than enough to lean in the fantasy direction rather than realistic. The last thing worth mentioning is the killer's item itself. The killers in Survive the Killer use knives and other melee weapons rather than a gun. The reality is that mass shootings are a lot more prevalent than something like a knife attack, so even though this game utilizes many of the aforementioned realistic elements present in all the other mass shooting games, it's still going to be a lot more accepted. As explained, the rebuttals and justifications for the existence of these games provided by both defenders and developers, in my opinion, aren't valid and heavily rely on false equivalence and persuasion tactics to make it seem like these games are just fun and innocent. All these games are dangerous and harmful and promote the concept of shootings in a glamorized way. Not to mention, the games are just outright disrespectful to those actually involved in situations like these in real life. Imagine being involved in a real-life mass shooting or losing your loved one in one, and then you see someone make a game indirectly based on your trauma. Obviously, you're not going to be happy with that. Therefore, I don't think these games should exist in their current iteration. Roblox's new shooting game trend is something I don't think should be allowed or permitted on the platform, at least in their current iteration. The way these games are presented, from their mechanics to their visuals, contribute to them indirectly promoting, normalizing, referencing, and romanticizing real-life mass shootings. Even if the developers did not intend for this, intent doesn't really matter when people, more specifically children, are being exposed to what are essentially mass shooting simulators. The danger in all of this, if it wasn't obvious already, is that these games instill the concept of mass shootings into the players, make the experience seem thrilling or fun, and provide already twisted individuals with a virtual outlet to live out their fantasies, which could potentially push them toward acting them out in real life. If the games didn't strive for realism with the inclusion of features like realistic blood splatter, gun models, death screams, or gritty environments, I, and I'm sure many others, wouldn't really have an issue. But in their current form, these games are far too realistic, to the point that they mirror real-life tragedies indirectly. The developers can try and free themselves from blame or draw false equivalents to other games in an attempt to protect themselves, but, in my opinion, none of their excuses justify the existence of their work. Mass shooting themselves are a very sensitive topic, as they've caused a lot of destruction, heartbreak, and turmoil in the lives of many. The reason I and many others have an issue with the mentioned games is because they purposefully strive to emulate mass shootings in order to capitalize on the expected controversy. The developers can provide all these different excuses, but it's blatantly obvious that the main selling point for all these different games is to closely mimic an actual real-life tragedy, which, in my opinion, is just disgusting. I'm not afraid to admit that most of the games I brought up are fun, engaging, and well designed, but that doesn't negate what the games are trying to do: emulate mass shootings as close as possible. That's disrespectful to the people involved in these things, but the games come with various other issues, such as exposing thousands of children to the concept in a glorified manner, and giving already twisted people an outlet to virtually carry out what they plan to do in real life. In the end, it's up to Roblox if these games should exist or not, but as conveyed in this video, I don't think any of them should. Shooter vs. Hider was just taken down while recording this video, but all the other games I mentioned are still up. It seems like this specific game is blacklisted due to all the backlash it got and the Eric Harris model that was found in it, while all the others are safe to exist. I guess we'll just have to see what happens. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments, subscribe, follow my Instagram @BlingMcQueen, and take care.